Even the moon goddess forgot her. The words followed Adeline Brooks through the rain like a shadow that refused to leave. Laughter drifted across Moonfall Square as cold water poured from the dark sky, turning the cobblestones slick and silver beneath the lantern light. Adeline knelt near the edge of the crowded plaza, her simple gray dress soaked through, her hands trembling as she gathered scattered festival ribbons that the wind had carried across the ground. Around her, hundreds of wolves celebrated the largest gathering of the year. Music echoed from the grand pavilion. Golden banners snapped in the stormy air. The scent of roasted food and expensive perfumes lingered beneath the rain. Yet somehow, even surrounded by so many people, Adeline had never felt more alone. A group of young she-wolves passed nearby beneath embroidered cloaks, their bright laughter cutting through the night. One of them glanced toward Adeline and whispered something that made the others smile. Adeline lowered her eyes immediately. She had learned long ago that meeting people's gazes only invited more attention, more questions, more reminders that she did not belong. 3 years had passed since her rejection. 3 years since the moment her former mate had stood before their pack and declared that he wanted anyone except her. The memory still lived inside her chest like a wound that never completely healed. Since then, every gathering had become a test of endurance. Every celebration reminded her of what she lacked. Every smile from others seemed meant for someone else. Thunder rolled across the mountains beyond the city walls. The rain intensified, drumming against rooftops and washing streams of water down the stone streets. Most of the festival guests hurried toward shelter beneath tents and balconies. Adeline remained where she was. Nobody had asked her to stay behind. Nobody had ordered her to clean the square. But leaving before the work was done would only create more reasons for people to complain about her tomorrow. So she continued gathering ribbons, folding damp decorations, and carrying small baskets toward a storage cart parked beside the fountain. The fountain itself stood silent beneath the storm, its marble wolves glistening beneath sheets of rain. For a brief moment, Adeline paused beside it. Water trickled from her hair. Her fingers curled around the edge of the stone basin. She watched her reflection shimmer across the dark surface. Pale skin, tired blue-gray eyes, rain clinging to every strand of chestnut hair. Nothing remarkable, nothing memorable, just the face of a woman most people overlooked. A sharp gust of wind swept across the square. Somewhere behind her, another voice rose above the rain. "Still here, Adeline?" The familiar tone carried effortless amusement. She turned slightly and saw 2 young wolves standing beneath the awning of a nearby merchant stall. Neither bothered hiding their smiles. "The festival's inside," one of them said. "Then again, I guess some people aren't exactly invited." The other laughed softly. Adeline offered no response. Experience had taught her that silence ended these encounters faster than arguments ever could. She simply lowered her gaze and returned to her work. Eventually, the pair lost interest and disappeared into the crowd. But their words remained. Not invited. The phrase settled heavily against her heart because part of her feared it was true. The Moonfall Festival celebrated bonds, family, and destiny. It celebrated everything she no longer believed existed for her. Another crack of thunder split the sky. Adeline finally carried the last basket toward the storage wagon. As she set it down, exhaustion washed through her. The long day, the endless smiles she had forced herself to wear, the constant feeling of being unwanted, it all became too much. She stepped away from the square and moved toward a quiet corner beside an old stone archway where the lantern light barely reached. There, hidden from most of the crowd, she allowed herself a single moment of weakness. Her shoulders sagged. Her eyes closed. A tear slipped free before she could stop it. Then another followed. The rain quickly swallowed them, carrying them down her cheeks until they vanished among countless drops of water. No one noticed. No one cared. At least that was what Adeline believed. She drew a shaky breath and stared into the darkness beyond the city gates where the forest stretched beneath the storm. Somewhere beyond those woods, the Alpha King was expected to arrive before midnight. The entire kingdom waited for him. The strongest wolves in the territories spoke his name with respect. Others spoke it with fear. Adeline had never met him. She never expected to. People like Damian Blackwood belonged to legends. People like her faded into the background. Yet far beyond the square, beyond the rain, beyond the music and celebration, a powerful figure had just stepped through the northern gates of the city. And for the first time all evening, he suddenly stopped walking. because carried on the storm itself was a scent unlike anything he had ever encountered before. Damien Blackwood had learned long ago that every scent carried a story. Fear smelled different from grief. Hope carried a different note than ambition. For years, that unusual gift had helped him rule the Northern Territories, allowing him to sense unrest before disputes erupted and dishonesty before lies were spoken. Yet nothing in his 31 years had ever unsettled him the way this scent did. The first time it appeared had been months ago during a council meeting in Blackwood Palace. It had lingered for only a heartbeat before disappearing completely. Weeks later, it returned during a violent storm along the eastern border. Then again beneath a full moon while he stood alone on the palace balcony. Each time it vanished before he could understand it. A trace of sorrow, a whisper of loneliness, a feeling that seemed to belong to someone he had never met. Tonight, for the first time, it was close. Damien stood beneath the stone archway of the northern gate as rain swept across the city. Members of the royal escort continued ahead before realizing their king was no longer following. Lantern light shimmered across puddles. Thunder rolled above the rooftops. Around him, thousands of scents blended together in a chaotic tide of celebration. Excitement, pride, anticipation. The entire kingdom seemed to be holding its breath for the Moonfall Festival. Yet beneath all of it lingered the scent he had searched for without realizing it. Loneliness. Quiet. Enduring loneliness. Damien closed his eyes. The emotion reached him with impossible clarity. Not the sharp grief of fresh loss. Not the panic of fear. This was something older. The kind of sadness that settled inside a soul for so long it became part of who they were. His silver eyes opened slowly. The sensation pulled at him again. Stronger than ever before. Not a command. Not magic. Simply a certainty that somewhere nearby stood someone carrying a wound that had never healed. Your Majesty? His captain asked carefully. Damien did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the rain-soaked city beyond the gates. The scent drifted through the storm like moonflowers blooming after midnight, delicate enough for most wolves to miss entirely. Yet once noticed, it became impossible to ignore. Something is wrong, Damien finally said. The captain frowned. Do you sense danger? Damien considered the question. Danger was not the right word. The feeling was far older than fear. Far deeper than a threat. No, he replied quietly. Someone is hurting. Confusion flickered across the captain's face, but years of service had taught him not to question his king's instincts. He simply gestured toward the grand pavilion where nobles and pack leaders waited for the royal arrival. The welcoming ceremony is this way, Your Majesty. Damien looked toward the glowing pavilion. Hundreds of important guests were waiting. The festival organizers had spent months preparing for his arrival. Tradition demanded his presence. Protocol demanded his attention. Yet the scent drifted through the rain once more. Closer now. Sadder. Familiar. And suddenly none of those obligations seemed important. No, Damien said. The captain blinked. Your Majesty? Damien stepped away from the escort. The ceremony can wait. Silence fell among the guards. Before anyone could protest, Damien turned and walked into the storm, leaving the grand pavilion behind. Rain soaked his dark coat almost instantly. The scent strengthened with every step. Loneliness. Heartbreak. Then something else emerged from beneath the sorrow. A memory. Faint but unmistakable. Rejection. Damien froze. The realization struck him with unexpected force. Whoever she was, this wound had lived inside her for years. Somewhere ahead, hidden among thousands of festival guests, stood a woman who had spent far too long believing she did not matter. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin. For months he had searched for a mystery he could never explain. Tonight, fate had finally brought him to its source. Then the scent stopped. Completely. Damien's heart tightened. The trail had vanished. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed the Alpha King's face. Somewhere beyond the curtain of rain, she had disappeared. Then the scent stopped. Completely. Damien's heart tightened as he stood motionless in the rain. For several seconds, the city seemed to disappear around him. The music from the festival faded into the distance. The voices of merchants and nobles became nothing more than background noise. Somewhere ahead, hidden beyond the curtain of rain, the woman he had followed through the storm had vanished. His wolf stirred uneasily beneath his skin. Not with anger, not with alarm, with something far more unfamiliar. Concern. Damien resumed walking. Slowly this time. His silver eyes scanned the square illuminated by lantern light and reflected rainwater. Hundreds of wolves moved between tents, pavilions, and market stalls. Yet none of them felt right. None carried the quiet ache that had drawn him across the city. Then he saw her, standing alone beneath an old stone archway at the edge of the festival. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't drawing attention to herself. In fact, she seemed to be doing everything possible not to be noticed. Her gray dress clung to her rain-soaked frame. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant lights, as though she were watching a celebration she no longer belonged to. Something inside Damien settled instantly. He had found her. Across the square, Adeline stared into the rain and tried to ignore the memories threatening to resurface. 3 years had passed, yet some wounds never truly healed. She still remembered standing beneath a bright spring sky, surrounded by smiling families waiting for the moon goddess to reveal their future bonds. She remembered the excitement that had filled the air, the hope, the certainty that her life was finally about to begin. And she remembered Mason Reed. For one brief moment, when the bond appeared between them, happiness had flooded her chest so completely that she could barely breathe. Then she saw the disappointment in his eyes. Not anger, not cruelty, something worse. Regret. The rejection that followed had changed everything. Mason never raised his voice. He never humiliated her publicly. He simply stepped away and refused the bond. The whispers started that same day. By the end of the week, everyone seemed to know. By the end of the month, everyone seemed to have chosen a side. Some pitied her. Others avoided her. Many quietly decided that if a respected alpha rejected her, there had to be a reason. Over time, invitations disappeared. Friendships faded. Conversations became shorter. Eventually, Adeline stopped expecting people to stay. It hurt less that way. The safest way to survive disappointment was not to dream at all. Damien continued watching from the shadows. He knew nothing about her history, nothing about the life she had lived before this night. Yet somehow the sorrow he sensed felt older than the storm around them, older than the festival, older than a single bad memory. It had become part of her, and for reasons he could not explain, looking away suddenly felt impossible. He had stood beside queens, diplomats, warriors, and rivals. He had negotiated treaties and commanded armies. Yet none of them had ever made him abandon a royal ceremony and walk into a storm. A sudden gust of wind swept across the square. Adeline lowered her head as rain stung her face. For a moment, she looked smaller somehow, more fragile, more alone. Damien took a step forward, then another. His wolf grew strangely quiet, not restless anymore, certain, as though it had been searching for something for a very long time and had finally found it. And for the first time in months, the mysterious scent that had haunted his thoughts no longer felt distant. It had a face. It had a name, waiting to be discovered, and it was standing only a few yards away. The rain continued falling across Moonfall Square, softening the edges of the city and turning every lantern into a shimmering halo of gold. Adeline remained beneath the stone archway, unaware that someone was watching her from across the plaza. She wiped quickly at her face, embarrassed by tears that nobody was supposed to see. It was foolish, she told herself. Crying would not change anything. It would not erase the past. It would not make people suddenly accept her. It would not give back the life she had imagined 3 years ago. So she drew a deep breath and forced herself to stand straighter. The festival would end eventually. Tomorrow would arrive. Life would continue exactly as it always had. Yet despite her determination, another tear escaped. The rain concealed it instantly. That should have been enough. The storm hid everything. It hid expressions. It hid weakness. It hid heartbreak. But somehow it could not hide what Damien sensed. Standing at the edge of the square, he felt the emotional current shift again. The sorrow he had followed through the city became clearer with every passing second. It no longer felt like a distant signal lost among thousands of others. It felt personal, real, human. He watched the woman beneath the archway lower her head as though carrying a burden nobody else could see. Something about that simple movement unsettled him. Not because it was dramatic. Quite the opposite. It carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had spent years pretending they were fine. Around him, nobles and council members were beginning to gather. Several noticed his arrival and hurried forward to greet him. Damien barely heard them. His attention remained fixed on the woman across the rain-soaked plaza. "Your Majesty, the welcoming ceremony is prepared," one official said. "The council is waiting inside the grand pavilion." Damien nodded absently. The man continued speaking about schedules and formalities, but the words blurred together. For perhaps the first time in his reign, Damien found himself uninterested in politics, celebrations, or appearances. His instincts kept returning to the same place, to the same scent, to the same lonely figure standing alone while the kingdom celebrated around her. Across the square, Adeline finally stepped away from the archway. The rain had begun to ease, leaving only a fine silver mist drifting through the night air. She decided it was time to leave. There was no reason to remain any longer. The festival belonged to other people. It always had. She started walking toward a narrow side street that would take her away from the crowds. Her shoes splashed softly through shallow puddles. She kept her eyes lowered, eager to disappear before anyone noticed her. Then a sudden cheer erupted near the center of the plaza. The Alpha King had officially arrived. Hundreds of voices rose together. Wolves hurried toward the grand pavilion, hoping for a glimpse of their ruler. The energy of the city shifted instantly. Adeline glanced up only briefly before continuing in the opposite direction. Kings belonged in stories. People like her lived in the margins. A strong gust of wind swept through the square at that exact moment. One of the festival ribbons hanging from a nearby lantern snapped loose and spiraled through the rain. Before Adeline could react, the ribbon wrapped around her wrist. She stopped instinctively and reached to untangle it. The ribbon was embroidered with silver thread and carried the crest of the Moonfall Festival. For a brief second, she simply stared at it. Once, years ago, she might have taken it as a sign of hope. Now it felt like a cruel joke. With a tired sigh, she carefully freed the ribbon and placed it on a nearby stone bench instead of leaving it in the mud. Then she turned to continue walking. Across the plaza, Damien watched the small act in silence. Most people would have ignored it. Others would have kicked the ribbon aside without a second thought. Yet despite everything weighing on her heart, she had still taken the time to protect something that did not belong to her. The gesture was insignificant, meaningless, perhaps, yet it revealed more about her character than any introduction ever could. Something tightened unexpectedly inside his chest. Before he realized what he was doing, Damien stepped away from the officials waiting for him. "Your Majesty," his captain called after him. Damien did not stop. Rain brushed across his coat as he crossed the edge of the square. The distance between them began to shrink. 20 yards. 15. 10. Adeline remained unaware of the powerful figure moving quietly through the crowd behind her. She adjusted her damp sleeves and continued toward the side street, focused only on leaving the festival behind. Then, just before she reached the corner, a wagon wheel struck a deep puddle hidden beside the road. Water exploded across the stone path. Adeline startled and lost her footing on the slick cobblestones. Her balance vanished instantly, and for the first time that night, Damien moved without thinking. Adeline's foot slipped the moment it touched the rain-slick cobblestone. The world tilted beneath her. A startled breath escaped her lips as her balance vanished completely. She braced herself for the impact that never came. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. For one suspended heartbeat, everything seemed to stop. The rain, the distant music, even her thoughts. Adeline found herself held securely against a broad chest, her hands instinctively gripping the front of a dark coat. Warmth surrounded her, steady and solid in a way she had not expected. Her pulse stumbled. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. The man holding her was taller than anyone she had ever met. Rain glimmered along the dark strands of his hair. Silver eyes regarded her with an intensity that made her breath catch unexpectedly. Not judgment, not pity, concern, genuine concern. The realization confused her more than the fall itself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Damien had acted before thinking. The instant he saw her lose her footing, his body moved on instinct. Now, standing only inches away, he finally understood why the scent had drawn him across the city. It was still there. The loneliness, the quiet ache, the hidden sorrow. Yet there was something else he had not sensed from a distance. Strength. Not the kind displayed by warriors or alphas. The quieter kind. The kind required to survive disappointment without allowing it to destroy who you were. "Are you hurt?" Damien asked softly. Adeline blinked. His voice was deep and calm, carrying none of the arrogance she had come to expect from powerful wolves. She quickly stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Heat rose to her cheeks despite the cool night air. "No," she replied. "I'm fine." The answer came automatically. She had been saying those same words for years. Damien noticed the hesitation before she spoke, the brief flicker in her eyes. Once again, He found himself wondering how many times she had forced herself to say those words when they were not true. "Thank you," Adeline added quietly. She lowered her gaze almost immediately afterward. People rarely looked at her for long. Experience had taught her not to expect them to. Yet Damien remained where he was. Not staring, simply present. It felt strangely unfamiliar. A gust of wind drifted through the narrow street, carrying away the last traces of rain. Above them, clouds parted enough for moonlight to spill across the cobblestones. The silver glow illuminated both figures standing beside the canal. Adeline became suddenly aware that the stranger looked oddly familiar. Not because she knew him personally, but because there was something unmistakably powerful about him. The way he carried himself, the confidence in his posture, the quiet authority in his presence. Before she could place the feeling, voices echoed from farther down the street. Several festival guests rounded the corner, laughing among themselves. One of them glanced casually in their direction, then stopped walking. His expression changed instantly. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became shock. "Your Majesty," he blurted. Silence crashed over the street. Every conversation ended at once. The other wolves turned toward the canal bridge and froze. Adeline frowned slightly. The title barely registered at first. Then her eyes widened. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she looked back toward the man standing before her. Silver eyes, dark coat, unmistakable authority. Her breath caught. The realization struck with dizzying force. The stranger who had just caught her in his arms was not a traveler, not a noble, not a passing festival guest. He was Damien Blackwood, the Alpha King, and judging by the stunned silence spreading through the street, everyone had just witnessed him abandon an entire royal ceremony to stand beside the one woman nobody else had noticed. The moment the young wolf recognized Damien Blackwood, all amusement vanished from his face. His companions stopped walking as well. Confusion swept through the group before realization followed. One by one, their expressions changed. The Alpha King was standing in a quiet side street instead of at the grand pavilion where the entire city expected him to be. More importantly, he was standing beside Adeline Brooks. The sudden silence caught Adeline's attention. She turned slightly and immediately froze. Her breath caught in her throat. For a second, she thought she was mistaken. The man standing beneath the moonlight seemed almost unreal. Tall, still, silver eyes reflecting the pale glow above the canal. Every story she had ever heard about the Alpha King rushed through her mind at once. Damien Blackwood, the ruler of the Northern Territories. The wolf whose decisions shaped entire kingdoms. The man people spoke about in lowered voices. Adeline instinctively stepped back. Her heart began pounding. Surely he was not there because of her. That would make no sense. The group of festival guests quickly lowered their heads in respect. One of them spoke first. "Your Majesty." Damien acknowledged them with a brief nod, but never looked away from Adeline. The realization unsettled her immediately. Why was he looking at her? The question repeated itself over and over inside her mind. She glanced behind herself as if expecting someone else to appear. Nobody did. The narrow street remained empty except for the canal, the bridge, and the growing tension in the air. Then another familiar voice broke the silence. Adeline. She recognized it instantly. Mason Reed emerged from the opposite side of the street accompanied by several friends returning from the festival. The sight of him stirred old memories despite her efforts to bury them. Mason slowed when he noticed the gathering. His eyes widened the moment he saw Damien. "Your Majesty," he said immediately, straightening. The small crowd grew even more uncomfortable. Nobody understood why the Alpha King remained there. Nobody understood why his attention seemed fixed on a woman most people barely noticed. Mason's gaze shifted toward Adeline. Surprise flickered across his expression. "Adeline," he said again, sounding genuinely caught off guard. "I didn't realize you were still at the festival." The words were polite enough. Yet everyone present understood the implication hidden beneath them. Adeline felt the familiar sting immediately. She lowered her eyes by instinct. Years of experience had trained her to expect disappointment before kindness. Damien noticed the reaction. He saw her shoulders tighten, saw the way she retreated into herself without saying a word. Something inside him hardened, not with anger, with certainty. Before he realized it, he took a single step forward, positioning himself slightly closer to Adeline than before. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable, yet it placed him directly between her and the rest of the gathering. Silence settled across the street. Rainwater continued dripping from the stone bridge. Somewhere in the distance, Festival music echoed faintly through the night. Damien finally spoke. She is standing on a public street. His voice remained calm, controlled. Yet every person present felt the weight behind those simple words. Mason opened his mouth as though searching for a response, then thought better of it. The message was unmistakable. Adeline did not need permission to exist. She did not need anyone's approval to be there. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Adeline stared at the cobblestones beneath her feet, stunned by what had just happened. Nobody had ever answered on her behalf before. Nobody had ever bothered. The strange feeling returned inside Damien's chest, stronger this time. As he watched her instinctively make herself smaller once again, the scent of old sorrow deepened around her. And for reasons he still could not explain, the thought of anyone making her feel invisible suddenly became impossible to tolerate. Nobody spoke. The quiet stretched across the narrow street like a living thing. Mason Reed shifted uneasily beneath the Alpha King's gaze. The festival guests who had stopped to watch suddenly seemed unsure where to look. Even the distant music from Moonfall Square felt muted now, as though the city itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Adeline wished the ground would open beneath her feet. She did not understand any of this. She did not understand why Damien Blackwood had followed her here. She did not understand why he had answered Mason. Most of all, she did not understand why the Alpha King continued looking at her as if she mattered. People did not look at Adeline that way. They looked past her, around her, through her. Yet Damien's attention never wavered. "Your Majesty," Mason said carefully, forcing a polite smile. "I did not mean any disrespect. I only meant that Adeline usually avoids large gatherings." The explanation sounded harmless enough. Several people nodded as though it made sense. Adeline lowered her eyes even further. She hated being discussed like a topic instead of a person. The familiar discomfort returned immediately. But before she could retreat into silence again, Damien spoke. "Does she?" The simple question caught everyone off guard. Mason blinked. "Yes, Your Majesty." Damien glanced toward Adeline. "And have you ever asked why?" The street fell silent again. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. No answer came. Because the truth was painfully obvious. Nobody had asked. Nobody had cared enough to ask. Adeline felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. For years she had accepted that reality. Hearing someone point it out aloud felt strangely overwhelming. Damien watched the emotions flicker across her face. The sorrow was still there. The loneliness was still there. Yet beneath both emotions, he sensed something else. Resilience. Despite everything she had endured, despite years of disappointment, she was still standing. The realization deepened the strange pull he felt toward her. One of Mason's friends attempted an awkward laugh. Adeline has always preferred keeping to herself. Damien's silver eyes shifted toward the speaker. Sometimes people withdraw because they are given no reason to stay. The laughter died instantly. Nobody challenged him. Nobody wanted to. Adeline stared at the wet stones beneath her feet. Her heart was racing so fast she could hear it. Every instinct told her to leave. To disappear before this became even more uncomfortable. Yet another part of her remained frozen in place. Because for the first time in years, someone seemed willing to see beyond the rumors that surrounded her. A cool breeze drifted across the canal. Clouds shifted overhead. Moonlight brightened suddenly, spilling across the bridge and illuminating the street in pale silver. The moment felt strangely unreal. Damien took a single step forward. Not threatening, not aggressive, simply deliberate. Adeline looked up before she could stop herself. Their eyes met. The world seemed to narrow around them. The crowd disappeared. The city disappeared. For one brief second, only that connection remained. Then a strange warmth spread through Damien's chest. Familiar, powerful, ancient. His wolf stirred for the first time all evening. Not with possession, not with certainty, with recognition. As though some forgotten part of him had finally stopped searching. The feeling lasted only a heartbeat before fading again, leaving behind a single, unsettling thought. For the first time that night, Damien found himself wondering why a woman everyone else overlooked suddenly felt impossible to forget. The question lingered in Damien's mind long after the moment passed. Why did she feel impossible to forget? He had no answer. Across from him, Adeline became painfully aware of the silence surrounding them. Too many eyes were watching. Too many people were listening. Every instinct urged her to leave before the situation became even more uncomfortable. Yet her feet refused to move. For years, she had dreamed about being noticed. Not admired. Not celebrated. Simply noticed. Now that it was happening, she found herself completely unprepared for it. Around them, the crowd remained unusually quiet. Mason Reed shifted his weight uneasily. His friends exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody understood why the Alpha King seemed so interested in a woman most of the city barely acknowledged. The confusion only made the tension worse. Adeline lowered her gaze. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said softly. The words sounded small even to her own ears. "Your Majesty should return to the festival." Several people visibly relaxed. The suggestion made sense. It restored order. It returned the world to the shape everyone expected. Kings belonged at ceremonies. Important people belonged in the spotlight. Women like Adeline belonged in the background. Damien studied her expression. Once again, she was trying to remove herself from the situation, trying to make herself smaller so everyone else could remain comfortable. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. "And what about you?" he asked. Adeline blinked and looked up. The question caught her off guard. "What about me?" Damien's gaze never left hers. "What do you want?" The street fell silent. Even the distant sounds of the festival seemed to disappear. Adeline stared at him, genuinely stunned. Nobody had asked her that question in years. Perhaps longer. Her first instinct was to give a simple answer. A polite answer. The kind people expected. But the words refused to come. Because she did not know. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped asking herself what she wanted. Surviving had become easier than hoping. Damien watched uncertainty flicker across her face. For reasons he could not explain, the answer suddenly mattered to him. More than the ceremony waiting across the city. More than the nobles who expected his attention. More than the traditions everyone else seemed determined to protect. Mason frowned. The exchange unsettled him in ways he could not understand. He had known Adeline for years. Yet he had never seen anyone speak to her this way. Never seen anyone look at her this way. The realization left a strange weight in his chest. A cool breeze drifted across the canal. Moonlight shimmered on the water below the bridge. Adeline finally lowered her eyes again. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. The honesty surprised everyone, including herself. Damien felt something shift inside him. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Respect. It took courage to speak the truth when a lie would have been easier. The crowd remained motionless. Nobody seemed willing to interrupt. For the first time all evening, Adeline was not invisible. People were listening to her, waiting for her answer, seeing her. And somehow, that simple realization felt far more frightening than being ignored. Then a voice echoed from the far end of the street. "Your Majesty." A royal guard appeared at the corner, visibly out of breath. Relief washed across his face when he finally found Damien. "We've been searching everywhere. The council is demanding your presence." The spell broke instantly. Reality returned. The festival. The ceremony. The responsibilities waiting for him. Yet as Damien looked at Adeline one more time, he found himself facing a choice he had never expected to make. For the first time in years, duty and instinct were pulling him in different directions. For several long seconds after the royal guard disappeared, nobody spoke. The narrow street remained suspended in a strange silence. The distant festival bells continued ringing across the city, reminding everyone that an entire kingdom was still waiting for its ruler. Yet Damien Blackwood had not moved. The realization unsettled every witness standing along the canal. Adeline could hardly process it herself. Her hands tightened around the edges of the borrowed cloak resting across her shoulders. The warmth of it felt unfamiliar. So did everything else. For 3 years, she had grown accustomed to being overlooked, forgotten, left behind. Yet tonight, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories had delayed a royal ceremony twice because he refused to walk away from her. The thought felt impossible. Around them, whispers began spreading once again. This time nobody bothered hiding them. Questions passed from one person to another. Confusion mixed with disbelief. Some stared openly. Others looked at Adeline as though seeing her for the first time. Mason remained silent. The weight in his chest had only grown heavier. He remembered the young woman standing beneath the spring sky 3 years ago. He remembered the disappointment he had felt when the bond appeared. Back then, rejecting her had seemed like the obvious choice. The practical choice. Tonight, for the first time, he found himself wondering whether he had misunderstood her from the very beginning. Adeline sensed the attention surrounding her and instinctively lowered her gaze. Old habits were difficult to break. Yet before she could retreat completely into herself, Damien spoke. "You should not have to stand alone." The words were quiet, intended only for her. Yet in the silence, everyone heard them. Adeline looked up in surprise. Damien's expression remained calm, but there was something unmistakably sincere in his eyes. No pity, no obligation, no duty, just honesty. The realization left her momentarily speechless. For years, people had offered advice, judgment, sympathy, excuses. Nobody had ever offered simple understanding. A faint smile touched Damien's face. Not the smile of a king addressing his people. The smile of a man speaking to someone he genuinely wanted to know. The festival is still waiting, he said. Adeline glanced toward the distant lights glowing beyond the rooftops. The music had returned. Warm golden lanterns illuminated the city square. Celebration continued despite everything that had happened. She hesitated. I don't belong there. The answer escaped before she could stop it. Damien studied her for a moment. Then he shook his head gently. Perhaps you've simply been standing in the wrong place. The words settled deep inside her chest. Something fragile shifted. Not healing. Not yet. But the first crack in a wall she had spent years building around herself. Around them, the crowd remained perfectly still. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Even Mason said nothing. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to mock. The woman they had overlooked for years was standing beside the Alpha King, and he was treating her with more respect than most of them ever had. Damien extended his arm toward the city square. A simple invitation. Nothing more. Adeline stared at it. Fear whispered that she should refuse, that she should leave before disappointment found her again. But another voice, quieter and far more stubborn, urged her to take a chance. Slowly, she accepted. A collective breath seemed to move through the crowd. Damien's smile widened slightly. Together, they turned toward the lantern-lit streets leading back to Moonfall Square. The city looked different somehow. Not because the buildings had changed. Not because the festival had changed. Because she had. As they began walking, people stepped aside without being asked. Conversations faded. Heads turned. Yet for the first time in years, Adeline did not lower her eyes. She did not hurry away. She did not try to disappear. The road ahead remained uncertain. Tomorrow would bring questions, rumors, challenges neither of them could yet predict. But tonight was not about tomorrow. Tonight was about a woman who had spent years believing she did not matter, and the moment she finally realized she had been wrong. Beneath the glow of hundreds of lanterns, Adeline Brooks walked back toward the light. And this time, she did not walk alone.